So today's notes are on composite functions. Sometimes you hear them called function composition. That's the same thing. What this means is that the output of one function becomes the input for another. Now you'll see the notation that they use looks like this. Parenthesis, F, and then there's like a little open circle, G, parenthesis, and then another X around parentheses. And this is read, you kind of read this out loud as F of G of X. And that's how you would actually read that. And what this means is F of G of X that way. So that G of X is the input for F of X. So let's see a quick example. Example, we're given that F of X is equal to 2X and that G of X is equal to X squared minus 5. Now, if we're asked to find F of G of X, remember that means F of G of X, you can kind of write it out that way. So what that means is that we should be substituting G of X into X in F of X. So what this becomes is 2X squared minus 5. You can see that this G of X function was substituted in to the X in F of X. Then you would simplify it and get a final answer of 2X squared minus 10. They could also ask the question to find G of F of X. Now just pay attention to the order there. What that means is that now we're going to be putting F of X into the G of X function. So that means we're going to take 2X and put it in for X in the second function. So what that becomes is 2X squared minus 5, which when you simplify becomes 4X squared minus 5. Because when it's written in parentheses like that, both the 2 and the X get the exponent. Another common example is identifying the two functions that are making up a composition. So the directions might say something like, find two functions, F of X and G of X, such that F of G of X is equal to H of X, and H of X is going to be our given function. So you're going to be given something like H of X is equal to 2X plus 7 quantity squared. So your job is to figure out the two functions, F and G, that have been composed to make this one. So whenever I'm looking here, G is the inside function. So what I would do is assign G of X to be like some sort of inside piece that I'm looking at here. Probably the easiest thing to do would be to say that G of X is equal to all that stuff on the inside. Now this isn't your only option, certainly, but if I assign all of this stuff to be G of X, that would make my F of X be equal to then X squared. Because if you want to think about going back and plugging G into F of X, this stuff would go in for X and give us back the original composition. Again, we could see one more of those. Now these definitely have multiple solutions. I'm just kind of picking out probably the most obvious. So again, I would assign g of x to be something, something sort of on the inside. Now, I might say that g of x is this stuff under the square root on the bottom, which would make my f of x function 1 over the square root of x. The same way, you can have maybe a different answer. Maybe you could say that g of x is equal to not just the stuff in the square root, but including that square root, which would make f of x then just 1 over x. So again, a lot of these have a lot of different answers, and so long as you can kind of justify and recompose them to make your original h of x, you're good to go.